teenager will think, like, oh my God, I can't get it right as a parent. You go home and just throw my hands up.
I love your analogy of building and the construction and scaffolding. I think that's really useful metaphor to take away, really.
Yeah, well, it's just that reminder each time. Am I trying to nudge the scaffolding a little bit, or am I actually just catching?
Yeah. So thank you for that.
Yes.
What do you think about food? Controlling, not necessarily controlling their food, but trying to direct their food. How much freedom do you give them with food? In the sense of, eating donuts and eating the bad stuff, you're trying to feed them all the good stuff, but once they get older and they've got their own money and it's just constant. So how do you...
I think it's about, it's a really, I know that it's quite, there is something that as they go through those sort of teen years, so generally puberty begins around sort of 11-ish, and at the same time you've got the hormonal changes, you've also got the changes in terms of their brain, hence this, we used to think the brain matured at 18, it doesn't, it's more like 24, 25. And it's the last bit. If you imagine in your brain, it's almost like the scaffolding goes up. And so the last bit to mature is the front bit, which is where logic and problem solving and reasoning comes from. So they tend to be more impulsive, and they do tend to show this real urge around sugars and things like that. And it's quick energy release. So I think it's about, and it's difficult when you're having those conversations, particularly if you've got a child who you think actually probably it's impacting their physical health in terms of the way that they're looking, it might be impacting their self-esteem. So it's always being mindful around that food is simply fuel, and talking to them about how the choices that they make that may be able to fuel their body. And it's the language around little in moderation. The difficulty that you've got is that they do seem to hit this particular time when it just seems to be easy, and a lot of it's around convenience. It's easier to get hold of a donut, probably, than maybe, or probably much more exciting, than a banana and a handful of nuts. So,
can I just add there, which I think we mentioned the other day, that in February the conference is the nutrition guru. Tina Long-Cork is coming in, and her main talk is going to be all about nutrition and optimising health, and hopefully she'll also be doing, we're just working on this, some work with our exam year groups about optimising exam performance based on eating, sleeping, all those kinds of things as well.
yeah, Tina's brilliant,
Yeah.
so she'll be good.
So do you think just let them get on with it and just gently say, just be careful about this, be careful about that, or interfere?
How long?
15.
I think it's difficult to interfere. It's not about, it's funny, I was on a radio show yesterday talking about fussy eating, and there was obviously a teacher who was on there, and his father was talking about, I've learned that my 14-year-old just simply not going to eat mushrooms and onion. And this other lady came on, who was actually a primary school teacher, and said, well, in my house, they have to try everything, and if they don't try anything, then they go to bed. So I think it's about having, it's how you approach the conversation. I think it's not about just throwing your arms up and thinking, okay, I can't do anything about it, but it's about trying to chip away at having those conversations when they're home, preparing really nutritious food, talking about brain foods for certain periods of time of their life, but not getting sucked into the lecture. When we do the whole, and I know this because there's a huge amount of body of research that looks at the impact of food on mental health. I know it. My poor children have heard me bang on about it for their entire lives. And so when they reached that point, I had to step back a little bit because I knew that it was literally going in one ear and out the other. And to some extent, it was like, yeah, right, I'm going to order Domino's because he said that. So it was almost an anti-movement. So I had to just simply say, you've got exams coming up, I've just left a little rescue pack out for you. These things might be really helpful, but it's up to you if you want to take them. And do it that way, rather than then feeling like you're bending your ear. It's about yet something else that you're giving them a hard time about.
Brilliant, thank you so much.
Is it about balance? I'm just thinking about the food thing. So my son's the same. He loves a donut. He's really happy with the donut. but alongside of the donut, there might be some fruit, there might be
Yeah.
some cooked breakfast, or there might be some other things that go along with that.
Yeah.
Because I don't want him to eat. I want him to eat what he wants to eat
To make the
because
choices.
he wants to eat that stuff. He wants to eat that food, and that's fine for him at that particular moment. But there's some other things that go around the periphery of that,
Yeah.
maybe.
Yeah, and it's a little in moderation, and it's also looking at what are the things that they're sort of eating. So, for example, and I'm no nutritional expert, Tina would do a much better job, but it's things like certain foods are going to sustain you for longer. When you're doing certain exercises, it's making sure that they've got the proteins and things. They're much less likely to reach for the craving food, particularly if they're then doing these energy drinks, or they're doing coffee. It's what we know now. Nutrition, even as an adult, it's all personalised. It's how your body responds. But there are certain things that we know is much less likely. You know, we get these massive spikes of glucose and insulin spikes, and then we crash, and it's the crash that's the issue. But if they're eating certain things and it's about order of food, it's about things that they have alongside it, they're much less likely to get that crash. And so if they're less likely to have the crash, they're much less likely to reach for the donuts all the time.
I loved your point about the having the adult conversation about this is your approaching exams, and have you thought about what you did really well last time and what you might want to do differently this time. However, the issue, I'm not just using that as a particular conversation, but when you're having a conversation with your boy that they just don't want to have, it escalates really, really quickly, and then basically they're just not listening. You can end up getting into a head-to-head so easily with them. I mean, and it doesn't matter whether or not you back off or you avoid the conversation, because either of those things,
It just goes.
that doesn't work for them, and it doesn't work for
No,
you.
and I think as boys would typically be kind of, we would typically, stereotypically think of boys and not wanting to have those conversations. So I would approach it as there's a couple of things you can do. George is coming back out again. George, I know you don't want to have this conversation, okay? We just need to have that. We need to have a conversation about it at some point. If you want, we can have it now, or you let me know when you want to do it. So try and approach it on that sort of basis, but also drip feed. And then sometimes it's being able to acknowledge, George, I'm sensing that you probably feel like I'm having a bit of a go at you, or that you're really angry, or you're upset with me, or you're feeling that I don't trust you. And I really get that, and I'm really trying to say that this is not coming from that place. Help me to do this better, to have this conversation better, and we can have it later if you want to. But I think sometimes when we're having those conversations is that if we've not had a history of always having conversations about things, it's like, where the hell has this come from? Why are we doing it now? Why are you interfering? No one else's parent wants to have a conversation. So it's just about drip. And sometimes you have to play the long game. You just have to accept, you know what, I'm not going to make a difference today, but if I can over the next 6 months, just little.
I think it's about picking and choosing the time.
Picking and choosing the time, which is often why children are much more likely to have a conversation with you. Have you ever noticed it? They suddenly bring up something big
When it's really quick.
when they know it's going to be really quick. So just before the lights are going to go out, or it's like, I know they can't get into the whole. It's like 5 minutes they're going out, and then that's what happens. So you get some of that, but I would try different times. Yes.
So we have 5 boys between the age of 12 and 18. They come together with a great deal of trauma. My 3 boys had lost their mum when they were young, and now left an abusive relationship. So we have some interesting challenges. Lots of the things that you said obviously resonate with what we've heard, but what would you do as the one thing that we should focus on as we bring these children together?
I think it would be to talk about emotions. Now, it's going to be difficult for those where there'll be trauma for all 5 of them. But I think that's probably where I would focus in on. And I think I'm a big fan of family meetings. They're not minuted. people don't come with notebooks. But I think it's a really good opportunity to get together as a collective. What's happening with us? It depends obviously how often you're seeing them. You know, what's worked this week, what hasn't worked, what's coming up next week that might be a bit of a challenge, or I'm going to be working away from home for a couple of days, how can we manage all of those sort of things? I do think I'm a big fan of gratitude, and I think if you do a family get together on a regular basis, you can get those really big glass jars and have those conversations around very small things that we're grateful for. Because quite often we really focus on the big stuff, and actually we forget that just those tiny, you know, mine is always around food. I had my favourite pudding. Or, you know, I'm just so grateful that you were there to pick me up just before it poured down with rain. Just those small things. But I would definitely work on that, because every aspect of them navigating the trauma is all about opening up about emotions, and all about and knowing that you're playing a long game. It's going to take time. And when we talk about, I think what's a big important thing to do when we talk about trauma, so when PTSD, I'm not suggesting it is PTSD, but when we talked about PTSD when it first came out, it was always very much associated with veterans. You've seen something awful, and that was PTSD. What we know now is trauma is relative to you as an individual, you as a child. So it can be trauma with a capital T, or it can be trauma with a little t. For some children, trauma can be moving school. A really positive thing, but it's trauma. It could be being bullied. For someone else, it has to be like unbelievable before it becomes trauma. It has to be that they've been in a sort of a graphic car accident they've just managed to survive. So it's all relative. And the thing is, so often that happens. I'm currently working with a 27-year-old who had a motorbike accident at 16. Never talked about it, never processed it. And now it's coming out at 27. So if we just afford them that space, and we talk about emotions, and we give them that opportunity, they may talk within months, days, they may not talk for years, but if you create that space to talk about it, but also talk about your emotions, and just like, oh God, I'm so frustrated, I've just sat in loads of traffic, or I'm a bit nervous, I've got this thing coming up, and just have it holding that space, I think, is and nurturing your relationship publicly as such. Not too much PDA, but just general that nurturing, that then gives them that modelling as well.
Cool, thank you.
Do you have any sort of guidance on the use of language? So our son's 13, 14 next week, and we do try to have conversations with him, but he'll immediately take it as a criticism. So you just think I'm not good at, no, that's not what I said. You know, and he'll have a different perspective entirely as to what I think I've tried to convey. So.
Yeah, my favourite saying for anything about things like that is, I've noticed that. So completely out of the blue, next time he's in a great normal, I've noticed that, George. And whenever I kind of try and have a conversation about, and it's probably, I don't know, it may well have a particular theme or about certain things, whenever I have a conversation about, you often sort of take it as a criticism, and I'm feeling like I'm clearly doing something wrong, because that's 100% not what I'm trying to do. Can you sort of help me sort of understand how I might do a better job of sort of beginning to have that conversation? Because all I'm ever really doing is trying to talk about putting the dishes away, or trying to sort of help make school life a bit easier. But I just feel like I'm really clunky with it, and I'm always getting it wrong. So I think being self-deprecating is mass off guard, and it's like, I don't know, I don't remember saying that. Okay, all right, but I just, because I think about these things after we've had these conversations, and the last thing I want you to do is to be thinking that I think anything less of you, or I'm criticising. It's always coming from a place of love, but maybe my words don't land the way that I think they are with you, so help me.
Okay.
But I've noticed, use it then, I use it with my husband all the time. I noticed that! Yes.
Funnily enough, I've also got 5 boys, and they've all been through this school, and one or 2 lessons now. And one of the problems I've had with all of them is disgruntlement over lack of free time. And that goes back to the micromanagement thing, because on particularly boys in this school, they have a lot of academic pressure, they have a lot of prep, and not only that, we are encouraged by the school, obviously, joining this club, getting the full experience, but then, you know, I do kick them along to piano lessons, but I don't know how much freedom you should give them. You know, I feel I'm a bit of an older mum, and I want to set them up in life so that they've got all the tools to go, so I'm always trying to think you should do as you do. But on the other hand, they have to choose it themselves, and it's always been, you know, as the two youngest, they're just, oh, you're getting free time now, so yeah, you know, and it's difficult for me to step back. Probably you're saying I should.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is an interesting one around when you're in a boarding school environment. Of course, there's going to be lots of things on offer because it's your home in lots of ways, and some is having that choice. I think it's part of it is also about remembering. So we talk about, probably all familiar with this idea about introvert and extrovert. And usually what we think is confident people are the extroverts. Hello, I'm here, lovely to meet you. Yeah, it's all about energy. And so sometimes, particularly the boys that are talking about never having a free moment are probably introverts. So extroverts get their energy by being around people, they're charged up. And an introvert can be just as sociable, can be just a party animal, but they then need to recharge, and they have to recharge on their own. So it's also being able to recognise, and it's not, some children need to have a label for educational needs and extra support. And I don't want introversion and extroversion to end up becoming slightly self-fulfilling, but it's helping them be able to recognise, how do I recharge myself, and how do I prioritise recharging? Because I think in a world that is supremely busy, we as adults don't take enough time to be present and to recharge. And I think we don't want to set up our boys to feel like they always have to be on the go. And recharging for some may literally be 15 minutes, and that may actually happen through a sports activity. For others, it requires an hour or more than an hour. So it's having conversations much more around the recharging. And you know, you get that sort of analogy where you've got like a jar and it's got big rocks and smaller ones and then sand. I try to think of it as you put your big rocks in first, they have to do their work. You know, there's certain things and obligations that they have. Those go in. What they then choose are those activities, and then we fill that up with space. There needs to be space. And if that is too full, I think that's at their detriment. I think it's at their detriment academically, I think it's at their detriment emotionally.
It's difficult when you get to the sixth form, getting to school, thinking ahead to university, you've got a personal statement to write, you've got to put things in this personal statement that isn't just academic. So you think, well, I don't do enough things. It's a balance, isn't it?
It is a balance. Because I'm a big believer in it, this idea about it takes a village, I did this conference at a school, and we had a speaker who came from industry. I say this with love. She was talking about having 600 applicants for a job. And her words were, I see too many tick box activities, D&D, X, Y, Z. I'm not interested. Give me someone who set up an eBay account and is selling some stuff. Someone who's got a blog, or something that is different. I think sometimes we get sucked into this belief that our boys need to tick these criteria. And that might be the case if they're going down a very specific traditional route where they have to get into a very specific university and a very specific next step. But for most that are going out into the world of industry, they have to differentiate themselves, and the best way to do that is from something that you're really interested in. And so don't get sucked into busy, I need to fill my CV, but much more actually, what's interesting for me that I can then have a conversation with someone about, whether it's just, I don't know, maybe they're massive fans of chess, and they can give all, they know chess champions, and they've watched certain things, and they've written an article about it that they've submitted into a newspaper. I think that's where, and then actually that helps recharge them because they're doing something that they're passionate about. Yes.
What happens if they're just obsessive over one thing, and that's what they want to do, and they're just completely tunnel visioned, and I keep saying, why don't you try this, why don't
I think if that's their passion and it's genuinely being driven by them, I think I don't have an issue with that. I think it might just be about encouraging them to have some breadth in terms of experiences. So other things that might help you, and not doing it from a perspective of saying that it's helpful because of your CV or what it might look like, but much more a case of actually, do you know what, it might just be good for some fun. It goes back to this failure. One of the things that sometimes happens, this might be happening, it might not be, sometimes we get tunnel vision on something because we found that we're very good at it. And the idea of trying something else because we're not very confident and we might fail, and what if things go wrong? And so actually, I quite like that, but I'm good at this and I don't want to try that. So I think maybe it's that language around, just give something a go. It's not for anything, not for your CV at all, just might be quite fun. Trying to talk about this idea of breadth for the sake of just broadening their skill set rather than. So it depends. Sometimes they are absolutely tunneled. That is what I'm going to do. They're passionate and that becomes their thing. But sometimes it's because actually I don't feel confident enough to try something else.
So what's it's been like that from a young age? It's just tunnel vision to do something. That's what you want to do.
And the difficulty with that is that if it doesn't, it just depends about their temperament. If it doesn't work and they fail, it's how easy can they bounce back, and that's where we have to do the whole breadth. Yes.
I like your analogy around when you're asking them to do something and that being grunty and you then take the hard line approach because you don't think they're listening and they don't care. So that's very relevant to my 14-and-a-hal-year-old. And Lisa says, are you taking shots at me? Just come downstairs. Is it right that they just don't remember or think? You know, like just tidying their room, just picking up stuff, just, I don't know, putting the towel on the rail. So then you sort of feel like, you know, you need patience and sort of time to keep saying in a gentle, you're saying things, but is it right that they just don't remember? That they
I
just
think it's about priorities. They just don't see it as a priority. So I don't know what it is about boys and baths that feel like they have to not just bath themselves, but the whole of the bathing floor. It's just like literally there's like being a whole wave all over the floor. I just don't think. I think they're so. It's part of the brain restructuring, the rewiring, is that they just don't. If it's not important to them, they don't do it. And we've all been there, haven't we? Like we say something to them, and their brain says exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
Well, this is really important. I'm going to do that. And it's like, oh, I just said that to you yesterday. So I think it's about that. I think where we can pick the battles. It's not about just like throwing, but just. Sometimes what can happen is the atmosphere of the house can become so draining because we're like, oh, could you just put it in the dishwasher? And your towel. And it's just too much. So they then go into, I've gone into shutter mode. The shutters have gone down.
And then you start getting angry.
And then you start getting angry. So I think, so part of it is about picking the battles. The other part is being really short and succinct. So towels off the floor. It's good. Well, otherwise we do that. How many times have you got towels not on the floor? You don't get wrong. So if we just get into this, and then they go, so if we just simply have towels on the rail and just keep it like very clear what we want them to do rather than the whole big thing.
But then if they don't do it and you're just nagging them, which I had this conversation last night, I'm just sat here today going, oh, because the atmosphere this morning was really frustrating. We all got in the car and nobody spoke. It was just like,
But they've forgotten.
yes.
Oh my God, this is like so over it. Yeah.
So how do you get that?
I think it is really picking your battles. Really picking that idea about what matters most. From a personal preservation, being someone who I cannot cope with untidiness, and I have a husband who is the most untidy, is for my self-preservation, I don't focus on that, I focus on other things around, what's important actually, which I didn't talk about, is having conversations with our boys about them contributing. So in my view, everyone gets to live in this house, We all get to use the sitting room, we use the dishwasher, we use the washing machine, blah, blah, blah. This is all, it's a home, and it's not chores, don't use chores, I don't want to do chores, but talk about contribution. We all have to contribute to the upkeep of this home, and my request to you as your contribution is that you pick up the towels. Just, so when the next person comes in, or when the cleaner comes to clean your ensuite, if you're lucky enough to, whatever it is, that there is a certain element we all contribute. It is not my role to go around the whole house picking up after you, but it is recognising when we talk about contribution that we can't expect them to do things the way that we would. So I would love them to put the cushions back on the sofa in a very special plumpy way at a certain angle. Just as long as they're off the floor, that's fine. So it's that. Because otherwise we just get so, it's like, I remember very vividly my mother would always be like, you tidy up and say, Mum, I've tidied. We were allowed in the kitchen on a Sunday to cook. My mother would shut the door because she couldn't stand mess. And it was always like, when you two are finished, make good. And then of course we'd make good, we'd come out and my mum would just redo it. But it was, we'd at least had that sort of attempt. So I think when we talk about contribution, getting them to cook, getting them to contribute actively in the house, I think then helps them see that it's a collection, because then that avoids the stereotyping, which is, you're the boy, I'm the mum, usually, sorry, I clean up after you because that's my job, and your job is just to sort of, just wake a destruction, but just follow. So I think when we talk contribution, that also helps, but it's also about battles. So if you're having battles about them focusing in on their work, getting off their Xbox, those are probably bigger battles to be having than picking up the towel.
So one thing, so my husband is Italian, he's role modelling leaving your pants on the floor. So I, after they do the whirlwind around the house and clear it all up and pick up the towels, so then when they come back, it all looks perfect and the towels are dry, or just, that's an example, but, so my husband says, leave it. Leave the room, leave the bathroom.
Yep.
But then the washing doesn't, so do you think we should leave it?
Leave it.
And then they don't have the towels.
Yep, leave it. I'm a big believer, I don't believe in punishments, I believe in consequences. And the consequence is, if the towel is on the floor and it's wet, then they come out and shout, Mum, shower, wet towel. It's a really good consequence. But I also think where you will probably be most impactful, sorry, men, is actually to have a conversation with your husband about modelling. So I've noticed, darling, that your underpants always... No, I think modelling is... Because if you're going to read one book about raising boys, I would highly recommend Stephen Biddulph's Raising Boys. It was my Bible when it was raising my son. And boys have that specific gorgeous time with us as mothers, but their fathers and then their mentors, their uncles, their scout leader, their CCF, whatever it might be, is really important. And so it's making sure that those role models are having some of those conversations and modelling contribution to the home, picking up their stuff, talking about emotions.
But I would say, he has said to me, he's got 23 years, he goes, I find it quite sweet that you thought, did you think you were going to change me? And I'm sorry, I haven't changed. So is it like, because I then say, because your mother didn't obviously tell you to do this is why. But so is it then that they're just intrinsic, that kind of behaviour, or can we change it?
No, 100%. When I go to girls' schools and I'm talking about girls, I've got mothers and fathers talking about their daughters. You literally cannot see the carpet because it's lined with clothes, knickers. It's not a boy thing. It is a teen thing.
I'm just going to leave the washing until there are no more underpants in his drawer, and the ones that are on the floor are so crusty, he's going to be able to that's the answer.
Someone's fun alternative.
Winding each other up, when the kids wind each other up, my son winded up one of his sisters, and I'm saying to the girls, don't take the bags. But what should I be saying to him to stop him?
Yeah, I mean, I think with the sibling, I think I've got a very clear, we all know what happens with siblings, whether they're boys and girls, or boys and boys, or girls and girls, is that one is really good at, and then one then lashes.
Yeah.
They then come to you, and then you've got this refereeing thing going on. Never, ever, ever referee an argument that you have not witnessed.
Yeah.
Because you will always be taking sides. You love them more than me, you always take their side, you don't really, because you don't. I think we know intrinsically which is the one that's doing the niggling and which is the one that then gets physical. So you can't referee, but it is around having conversations when you witness it of, George, come here a minute. I've heard what you just said to Sophie, and that's not how we speak to each other in this house, or that wasn't okay. And to you, that might just be banter, might just be a little bit of fair play or whatever it is. But how do you think she felt when that was said? If that was said to you, but like this, how would that then? So it's about, because you're witnessing it, it's about pulling things up. I do think part of it is also having conversations, and this isn't just a girl-boy thing, but if you've got brothers where one's being particularly unkind, you also want to have a conversation to the one that's the perceived victim, and to say, look, George is going through a particular, you know what he's like. It's really important you remember that you can't change what he does. We can't change what anyone else does, but we can only manage our own response to that. And if it, what could you do when it's winding you up? What might be helpful next time? Because you don't want, essentially what you don't want is a sibling having to compensate for another one, unless there's a very specific thing. Maybe they've had some really difficult results, maybe something tragic has happened to a friend, or something like that, then in which case we would then be talking to them about affording them a bit more compassion. What I would add is that as human beings, we naturally compare ourselves to others, and siblings will compare themselves all of the time. And if you're finding a certain dynamic happening more often than not, I do a bit of an audit and actually look at. So, for example, and it's not about reality, it's about perception. If I'm someone who's not feeling terribly confident, I maybe go through that kind of awkward team, working out who I am, how I fit in amongst my peers, who's top dog, who's not. So I'm in this right thing. Maybe I struggle having friendships, and I perceive a sibling as having a much easier time. They seem to be so confident, they never struggle with friends, they don't worry about their academics. Then what happens is that plays out in some of the sibling dynamics. So it might be compounded by, I don't feel very confident about myself, and you seem to coast through love, so I'm just going to give you a hard
So
time.
when I haven't witnessed the winding up and they've come to me and their mom's referee, what am I doing now?
I didn't see it, can't referee it. Because otherwise what happens is it perpetuates. What you can do if it's constant is I've done periodic kind of, voice is a bit raised here, it doesn't sound like we're having a great time. Do we think it's probably best if we just go off and do some things separately for a little bit? And then to try and get in there before it explodes.
Is there an optimum time to have a conversation with boys? My 15-year-old seems to come to life at half 9 at night. So we wouldn't have any meaningful conversations in the morning, but at 9:30 is kind of as a parent kind of thinking it's probably not the time to lift the lid on anything serious. Is there any science behind the way then the brains work, the best time to kind of engage with?
I think my suspicion is there'll be two things that play. So when children go through this big brain development between sort of 11 and 24, is that it can shift their sleep cycle, hence why there's lots of evidence that suggests that teenagers should be starting school later. So part of it is that their natural sleep cycle is that little bit later. So that may well be having a bearing in it. But I think sometimes the bearing is just simply, if I pick this time, I know there is a finite amount of time we have to discuss this, and it won't go on. So sometimes it's just simply, I'm choosing this time. And I know as parents we then think, do we really want to be starting this conversation? Because they're not going to go to sleep. But I don't know whether this bears out with your boys, but whenever I'm in a school, I'll always ask for a show of hands of the number of people who struggle to fall asleep at night. And by when I'm asking year 9 and above, I'd say between 85 and 95% of them will stick their hand up. Because they're ruminating, they're going, some of them it will be temporary, maybe 15 minutes, others it can be hours. Replaying the day, what they could have said, what they should have done, having little micro videos with different endings. So the reason why is often brain has been busy and preoccupied. I'm doing this activity, I'm doing that activity, I don't think. And the first time they start thinking is around that time that their head is either going to hit the pillow or they're going to have their lights off. So sometimes it's God, I haven't thought about it and now it isn't quite big in my head. So I would seize the opportunity, begin to have the conversation. If it becomes big and deep, then it's I'm conscious of time now, maybe we could follow this up. Should we talk about it the weekend or something? But I think it's to do with limiting the amount of time, but also just that's their busyness, but also that they're just naturally, their body clock shifts. Yes.
I was just wondering, the lady behind me was talking about like getting them to bed on time, or a time. We've got a very specific time in our house. But I did notice, just in this last couple of weeks, that the prep seems to have been a lot more than it would have been normally. And we've had God, I never get any downtime. I never get any downtime. So with that conversation taking place, you know, maybe we should extend it half an hour or whatever, 45 minutes, which he agreed to, but on the concession that we started to feel really tired or it's starting to impact later, we will change it. But I'm also having that same issue where the conversation there is starting to happen at 9, 10 past 9, 9:15 at night, where you should be in bed, but now we want to talk about stuff.
Yeah, I think I would always try and have those conversations. So I've noticed that it's like the third night we're having conversations about there's clearly stuff that's going on for you. Why don't we just have a conversation after dinner rather than leaving it till when you go to bed? You said that this was really troubling you. Let's kind of have a chat, try and bring it forward, particularly if you're finding, depends whether they're then struggling to fall asleep at night, but if you're then finding they're slightly, even with their light off, that they're sort of not, the quality of sleep isn't great, then it's probably just on their mind. So try to bring it down. Well, if you've got an upstairs and a downstairs, try and have that conversation downstairs. If when we look at sleep hygiene, it's really, our children nowadays, their bedrooms are their sitting rooms, their dining rooms, their study, their bedroom, they serve multiple purposes. So I think trying to, before bedtime, having just a simple routine of redressing their room and transforming it from whatever it was before into a bedroom. And if you're very fortunate and the children have got separate studies and other things, fabulous, their bedroom is only their bedroom. But most of us, everything is in there. So my preference would be that there should be no tech at all, no laptops, no desktops, no televisions, no phones, save for us. I don't think we should have any phones in our bedroom either. But if those are then removed, it's almost like you get them to take the stuff out, walk out of their bedroom, and then walk out of their sitting room or their study, and then they're walking into their bedroom. So that helps. So trying to keep those conversations, if they can happen in a different space, it then helps them just psychologically go up fresh with that. But I would try and see if you can sort of like, I've noticed that, clearly not going on. It feels like there's probably quite a lot of pressure because I'm noticing you're feeling like you've got a lot of prep. You're talking about not really having a lot of downtime. What could we do? What could you do at creating some space?
So do you recommend then that if they can, they shouldn't do their prep at their desk in their bedroom?
I think if that's what we've got, then that's absolutely fine, but get them to redress that bedroom. Most teams will have a desk in their bedroom because it's just, and some will complain about doing it in an open space. I don't like boys being holed up in their bedrooms for hours and hours on end because I think they lose that connection time which they need, and if they've been holed up and then they get that connection with us just before bed, that's when they then want to have these long conversations.
And a lot of the time asking for permission to do things just before bed, and you're sort of thinking, okay, well, I don't know what we're doing. Okay. So is it best then to say, let me think about it, and rather than say no straight, because I realize you say no, it just
It just goes, yeah.
So best to say
give me some space. I just need to think this through. My children were there, but go that means no, their mum.
Yeah.
At least I don't want to say no out of auto response. I want to give it some thought.
Yeah, and then talk about it.
And talk about it. Yeah.
And what's the best possible way to gently sort of talk to your son about the priority? Because like my son, he's going to be next year, he's in upper six. And he's lovely, I've got no issues with him at all, but he seems to, you know, he seems to take upon so, he's like, I want to do, you know, he loves music, I want to do this, I want to do this, I want to do this, that, I want to sing, I want to do that. And then like, but Hugo, you're going to uni next year, you need to focus, priority is now personal statement. That's what you need to do, otherwise you won't be getting to uni. And he was like, no, but I want to do this, and I'll find time, but he burns himself out.
And then
He lacks the energy, he hasn't got any time to recharge, but he gets really upset because he seems like I'm banning him. It's like, I'm not banning him, but this is your priority now, and he is just like, oh no, but I want to do it. He's upset with me.
about those, yeah.
I want to do this band, I want to do it fine, I want to do it Sunday, I want to sing, I want to do this, I want to do that. It's like, that's not what you should
No,
be doing.
I think there's a couple of things that I probably would look at. A, if you've got someone, even as an adult, if you're being busy, is what are you possibly running away from? Why are you not? So it's a type of procrastination, and procrastination is associated with avoiding a difficult feeling. So writing a personal statement may well be a difficult feeling. I don't feel equipped to write it. I don't know what to put in it. What if I don't get in? So you put it off, you become busy with it. But we've all done that when we study. Suddenly, all of a sudden, the kitchen needs to be cleaned. Yeah, it's nothing to do with that. It's to do with avoidance. But I think part of it is also then having conversations around, talk about this idea that we've got a bucket. And it's always filling up, but we don't notice until it tips over. And then we're like, exhausted, or we then go into rage. So it's being able to recognise what are the things that are filling the bucket, and what do we actually actively have to do to drain the bucket. Teens and boys think that one of the things that drains their bucket is being on the Xbox and Wii on their phone. I'm not saying that they shouldn't be, but it doesn't empty their bucket. It actually presses pause, because when they're off it, all of the stuff that's going on in their head is still there. So it's actually actively thinking about what are the things that help me decompress, and what are the priority things that if I got them out of my bucket would give me the space to do other things. So it's kind of unpicking both bits.
Yeah, but he doesn't really seem to understand that the priority now is like this uni statements, this, everything else seems to be a priority above that.
Yeah.
I'm just conscious of the time.
Oh God, sorry.
Yeah, no. Because it's 11:10, and I think you said that if anybody wants to ask...
Yeah, I'm going to loiter if anyone needs to.
But I hope you can all just join. I'm going home with a big conversation about contributions, because the shower has been my bugbear this week. So we're having a long conversation about a drip-fed conversation. Contributions. But could you all just join me in saying